Welcome back. We'd like to welcome you all to the Ammon Answers podcast. Happy New Year. We're coming at you January 7th. So been 2 weeks since our last cast, which we forecasted. We took some time off and enjoyed the holidays with our family and friends. Hope you guys did too. Ammon, you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do this.
I'm going to try something a little different.
Ready.
We've got so many questions. Keep them coming in. We only have time for so many. We're going to do 3. We're going to do kind of lightning round.
Sounds good.
I'm just going to ask you, then you're going to try to shoot them off as quick as possible. If you win the governor race, will you push to make sport betting legal in Idaho?
I don't think that'll be like a priority on my list. I grew up in Nevada. I know all about that, betting, gambling and so forth. I think there's some really important battles that I'm going to have to fight, and I don't know that that's going to be one of them, to be honest with you.
Cool. All right, number 2 is from Kim on Facebook. If you were the governor for the last 2 years, what would you have done to protect Idahoans? I think this is a really good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I certainly wouldn't have done what was done. I believe that an individual, an adult, has the responsibility to make choices for their own and stand by those choices. I think as a governor, I would have informed them. I would have given the people an opportunity to understand the facts, true information, and then make the decision for themselves, how they wanted to, conduct themselves, if they wanted to wear a mask, if whatever it might be. And I would have informed them and give them that information where they can rely on it and then let them make the choice.
Great. Number 3 from Anonymous. It's an email. I'm a total Bundy supporter. I'm very concerned about Ammon and Janice splitting the conservative vote and benefiting Brad Little, who then gets elected again. What does Ammon think about that?
Well, there's several things that I could say in response to that, but you have to make sure that Brad Little, as many things as he has done, and I hope to be able to expose a lot of the things that he has done with getting federal funds, $18 billion, restricting the use of hydroxychloroquine at the early stage, putting himself basically in dictator-type power using martial law orders and so forth. I mean, I could go on and I could show him suspending parental rights. He's done these things all under the cloak of COVID. But believe me, he's an empty suit. Brad Little is a pawn. He's being controlled and by other people. It's been a plan and something that's been going on for a long, long time. And these governors have been empty suits for a long time. So I think the question is, well, even if we have Brad out of the way and we put another empty suit back in, what do we have? Have we changed the direction of Idaho? Have we made it better? I don't think so. We have a lot of correcting that we need to do. And I think people are starting to see it. So, just removing Brad is not going to solve our issues. We're going to have to put somebody in there who's not an empty suit. And I would ask, okay, what has Janice done in the last 12 to 15 years? Because that's how long she's been in politics. And has she acted on her own? Has she done anything on her own? Or is she possibly just another empty suit? And so, we talk about splitting the vote just so that Brad Little can't get in or doesn't get in. But what does that really solve if we just say, okay, look, for example, like I'm going to concede, I'm not going to, so Brad Little doesn't get in, just so another empty suit can get in. So that's ultimately, I could go into a lot of detail there, but I want people to show me, how Janice is going to be a whole lot different than Brad Little. Her voting record is almost exactly like Brad Little. Her being controlled by other people is very similar. Yeah, they're different type of people. They're different people than who's controlling Brad Little, but she's still that politician who is just doing the bidding of another special interest group or multiple special interest groups behind the scene, and that's not going to keep Idaho.
Well, I think that's to this anonymous person. I know there's other people who have that question. The reality is this is a campaign, and we started like a year and a half before the actual election this coming November. We're trying to educate. We're trying to tell people this is what you believe in. This is what you feel like a lot of Idahoans believe in. So come to a meet and greet, watch these podcasts, read all the different articles, or listen to the interviews you've had a chance to be on, and then make a decision. There isn't splitting a vote if we are voting our conscience. And we've seen that in America this last few months. Crazy things have happened in different states. People are not just going with party line or incumbents. They're actually voting people like you, non-politicians, to high-level government.
I think there was a truck driver that won a governor's seat
right
out east somewhere.
I think it was New Jersey.
Was it? Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, and he did it with like a 20th of the amount of money that was spent from the other candidate. Yeah, things are happening, and they're not happening the way they were before. Everything's changed since COVID. Many people have woken up. Many people are becoming more aware, and that's our quest, to educate people and educate enough people and to get people to share this information around so that they can see the difference between an empty suit and someone who's really going to fight for the rights of the people of Idaho.
And I think that's the key, is the people of Idaho are going to elect their representative for a 4-year term. Yeah. And who do we think is going to represent us best? Yeah. That's what you're saying, empty suit.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it should not be just, okay, we have to get rid of Brad Little. We don't solve our problems by just getting rid of Brad Little. That doesn't solve our problem.
Right.
So I think we need to start looking at it that way.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to kind of, not hijacking this podcast, but, I was listening to the news this morning. It didn't even dawn on me that yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of January 6th, where the crazy stuff happened at the U.S. Capitol.
Right.
And so there was a press conference that hit my news feed this morning of two Republican outspoken representatives saying this is not acceptable. We have a whole bunch of people. Let's go ahead and can you cue up the video for us?
To media outlets, he's not in the D.C. jail under Deputy Warden Kathleen Landerkin. So I think we have a lot of questions to ask, and the people that should be answering the questions is our FBI and our Department of Justice. I want to point some things out to you all. With the U.S. Capitol riot, there is over 725 arrests that I know of, and only one case has been dropped. For BLM Antifa riots, there were over 16,240 arrests, and over 90% of those cases have been dropped. What's the difference there, everyone? I'll tell you. For the BLM Antifa riots and violence, the victims were the American people and communities and cities all across our country.
Can we pause it right there real quick? Okay, so those numbers are astounding. There's 750 people is what she reported that were arrested. One was released. Through the summer of peaceful BLM protests, we had 16,241 arrests. 90%, she said, well, my math shows that's around over 14,000 people released. So there were still 2,000 people in custody. So that's good. But those people actually had our sitting vice president posting links for bonding these people out. Right. We had other representatives from other states doing the same thing, and yet there's no one coming to the aid for these 750 people who they rightfully should. Maybe they should be in jail. I don't know. We haven't seen any. They're holding the video that happened there.
Yeah,
they're not allowing anyone to represent themselves. I mean, it's just kind of like they're trying to hide them.
This very thing happened to my family and I. They went and rounded us all up. They said that there was a huge conspiracy. They charged us with these, charges of, domestic terrorism and basically it was this type, and it was a political prosecution. And that's what we have to understand what's happening to us as a country. These people who want power, who seek for power, have infiltrated our government, and they have politically now used the force of law to punish their political enemies. This isn't about what's right, what's wrong. Let me tell you how simple it is, the Capitol, the January 6th stuff, right? They've got cameras everywhere. If someone entered in and damaged the property, or let's say they just entered in unauthorized, what is that called? It's called trespassing, right? So they trespass. They cite the person for trespassing, and they go through the process. It's a misdemeanor. They go through the process of prosecuting him for trespassing. Well, that's not what they're doing. They're trying to punish these people for political purposes, for insurrection, for treason. These huge crimes, and that's not what happened. That's not what happened at the Capitol building, and it's very similar to what happened to my family. So anyway, it is political prosecution. Political warfare is where you isolate a person. They've done that. They isolate a group of people. They put them in prison where they can't communicate. They lock up all the information where no one can know what really happened, and then they demonize them. They began to say all these things that really aren't true, over-exaggerate everything, and they do it so that they can destroy their political enemy. That's what's happening. And we shouldn't even play. None of the Republicans, none of the conservatives, anybody that has any love for this country shouldn't play this game at all. Right. Because it's not surprising, but they're comparing Black Lives Matter, which I agree, and I think it's a great comparison, but they're saying somehow like that the 750 people might be justified, but it's over exaggerated. They're comparing it to Black Lives Matter. They're comparing it to releases, but in all, none of it is right. Okay, so charge some people for trespassing. But they wouldn't do that because they can't get politically what they want.
Right. There's a motive behind it. What was done, what I really liked, I think it's about a 30-minute press conference, give or take. And what they started out was with video evidence that didn't come from the government. It was private parties that were videotaping it. And someone compiled the video showing like agitators, like actors who were put in place. And we have facial identification recognition software that we can use to identify these people. This one gentleman they first cited, initially I think charged, and then, or no, he wasn't charged. I think he was on the watch list, and then after one day he was off. No charges, right? Apparently there's multiple people they have showing that these guys were encouraging the criminal behavior, and none of them are in jail.
That's what the FBI does. The FBI does that. They do it to justify their existence. So they go out, they find a situation or a person, and let's just boil it down to just say like one person, because this has happened multiple times. I even know people that this has happened to. They go get somebody who maybe not like quite aware of politics, or maybe he's excited about something that, whatever it might be, right? And then they go and they get around them by him and 4 or 5 other FBI agents. He doesn't know it. They're all undercover. They befriend him. They bring him into their group. They say that we're going to plan this and we're going to plan that. And he all gets excited about it. And there's one example of where a guy, they brought him in and they actually helped him and created a bomb. And then they made a plan where they're going to go blow up this building. And it was a federal building. It was for a Bureau of Land Management building. This is why I know about it, right? And so they help him build the bomb, and they help build it, and they basically give him the detonator, and then they all go, and he goes and places the bomb, and then he comes back, and they have him push the button, and then they arrested him. This guy had no capability of building a bomb, right, no capability of doing any of this, but they brought him in, and then they prosecuted him, and right now that individual is in prison, or probably in prison for the rest of his life, for trying to blow up a federal building. It was all instigated by the FBI. And then what is the headline? FBI catches domestic terrorists trying to blow up a Bureau of Land Management building. Right. And they look like they're really good. They instigated the whole crime. They found someone who they can make, the criminal, who can be the individual that does it all, and then they take the glory. Well, let's go back to what we're finding, and what it sounds like is coming uncovered, is many of the key people that are actually decided and pushing and encouraging people to go into the Capitol building on January 6th were FBI agents. Well, at least that's what they're assuming, because they have lots of evidence, but now the government, the FBI and the Department of Justice, won't release that information.
Right. So now we just have to take their word for it. Meanwhile, what you say is they're putting those people away and demonizing them without a defense. Yeah. So it's that
political warfare.
It's that political warfare that you talked about. So we're going to go a little bit longer in this video. And you actually, your name comes up because what they've done, and I really appreciate it, they started showing evidence of people who were instigators, who were agitating the situation, and they're not charged.
Yeah.
Right? So they built that case, and the DOJ will not release any of the information, so we can see
familiar,
if it's real.
very
right?
Familiar.
Okay. And then they showed that multiple times here, but then I think her Representative Green is the one who says this is a pattern that we've seen over and over. So she actually brings up the pattern, and the Bundy Ranch goes into that. Go ahead and roll the tape.
You know who the victim was? It was the Capitol and the members of Congress inside. My question is this. Why is this Congress obsessed with itself and cares nothing about the American people? This is a two-tiered justice system that should never exist in our country, and I'm fed up with it, and so are Americans all over.
So I want to point something out because I think she's making a really good point here, that there's a two-tier justice system, and basically that Congress has made it all about them, and that is true. But I want to, again, try to boil it down. What was happening there? I'm not going to justify someone breaking into a building, damaging things. That's not what I'm doing here. I don't justify that at all. That needs to be prosecuted. The person needs to, understand that that's not okay. It is our Capitol building. I get that, right? But what was Congress doing? Congress was in there doing the people's business behind closed doors. They wanted to certify an election that was already questionable. That was all that people, millions and millions of people were already concerned about. Now they want to go in the Capitol building behind closed doors, close the front door, make sure no one's in the gallery in the guise of COVID, and certify this election. Well, people outside had a problem with that. I have a problem with that. They don't get to do the people's business behind closed doors. The laws say that the gallery needs to be open so people can, every meeting needs to be open. Everything needs to be out in the open with visual, eyes on it, the people's eyes on it. But no, they wanted to close the doors and do this business, certify this election with nobody in the building. And so that right there was Congress's mistake. And they need to own it. They caused the situation, not President Trump. They caused it by trying to do the people's business behind closed doors. And that's the issue. And so the people are like, look, legally we have a right to go in. And they started to push their way in. Now, damaging things is not part of the program. But going into that building is the right of the people, and certainly when there's business being done. So I just want to say that let's go on. She's going to start making the comparison, I think, here of basically this pattern of the FBI instigating things. But I wanted to lay that out, basically, that I believe, and I would, challenge anybody to argue with me, against that, of that Congresswoman's caused this.
Okay.
Now, let's talk a little bit more about the FBI. They have quite a history of doing things. Remember, in Governor Whitmer's kidnapping plot, I can tell you that we know there were 12 FBI informants involved in that group, and we don't know how many federal agents were involved. Don't forget about the Bundy Ranch affair, where there were 15 FBI informants involved, and we don't know how many actual agents. But we can go back further. Another example would be in 1968 at the Democratic National Convention, where there were 10,000 protesters, and 1 out of 6 were federal undercover agents. You do the math, and that's approximately 1,600 federal agents at this protest in 1968 at the Democratic National Convention. Here at the Capitol security breach, we don't know how many federal informants, FBI agents of people in other agencies. We don't know those numbers because we have a January 6th committee that is unwilling and refusing to ask those serious questions.
Probably
now
cut it there.
What?
All right. So, I mean, they're making the case for us. This is one of the reasons why you, a businessman, is choosing to run for this office, right? It's not because you have the idea of wearing a suit every day, and maybe you do like the camera. I don't know, but it's actually kind of a nightmare running for a candidate, especially at the state level. It's a lot of time. A lot of resources. I mean, you've got a young family, so there's a lot, and it's not like a popularity contest. But I feel like these are the things that pushed you to make this decision.
Yeah, there is a two-tier justice system. I've experienced it. I've experienced multiple times. It's not justice when it's two-tier. When you have a group of people that have got control of the force of law and they use it against those people they don't agree with, their political enemies, and then they protect themselves by it. Right. That's not what justice is supposed to be. Lady Liberty is supposed to be blindfolded. She's supposed to give justice to everybody and equal. We talk about that in many forms, even in the Pledge of Allegiance, justice for all, right? Well, justice goes both ways. And what is happening here with our system, especially on a federal level, but it's certainly happening on a state level, even in Idaho, but especially on a federal level, you have, we have a situation that we've seen in other countries, seen like in Russia, we've seen in China, we've seen historically, we have a lot of examples where a party takes over. These group of people take over, they get control of the force of law, and they use it for their own benefits, for their own political purposes, and so forth. And that's what we have. And the FBI, unfortunately, the FBI was created during the Prohibition to basically enforce the federal law against alcohol.
Right.
Well, that didn't last. It didn't go so good. Alcohol consumption went up by 3/4, and then we created a black market and all of that, right? And then Congress was wise enough to say, look, this is just a disaster. We can't force people to be good, right? And they ended the Prohibition. But the problem, they didn't end the FBI.
Yep.
And that was a mistake. The FBI should not exist. I don't believe the FBI. I don't believe there's constitutional authority for the FBI. We don't need the FBI. All they have become is a massive force that is being used against the people, and they're very dangerous to the people's liberty.
And they're above the law.
Yeah, they have no law. They have no rule. That they do whatever they want in the name of the law, and they're the grossest violators of it. And how many of these situations, like this man, trying to blow up the Bureau of Land Management building, right? Which is not right. Don't get me wrong. But how many of these situations would have never existed,
right,
if the FBI didn't exist?
It's a justification for their budgets. Like, you need us. Look at what we saved, right?
We saved you. So anyway, there's lots of detail there. I've experienced it firsthand. When we had our trial in Oregon, it was exposed that many of the people that were there during the refuge in Harney County, many of them were FBI. And we even had evidence where we could show where these FBI agents were trying to instigate us to do certain things. And we were saying, no, that's not what we're about. That's not what we're here for. We're not going to do that. And we had that and showed that to the jury, and the jury was so upset that the FBI and the government would try to get us to do things and then blame us for that and use that as the reason to prosecute us. Now, luckily, we were able to expose that. We were able to show the jury that, and the jury acquitted us on all charges because we were there for peaceful purposes. We were there to stand for the Hammonds, and the FBI wanted to come in and make it something about violence.
Well, and that was fortunate, and now you guys had to work really, really hard to get that evidence in front of the jury.
Oh, yeah.
It was a constant fight, but luckily we got that out. And even though Nevada timeline came before Oregon, the court date for Oregon was before Nevada.
Correct.
And so you already had a jury found you not guilty in Oregon of all counts. And then you now go to Nevada, and now they're really pushing hard not to let any evidence in.
Yeah, in fact, that's exactly right. So it took a long time, but the FBI, again, lied about cameras that they had, snipers on the hills, all of that. And they were trying to say that none of that happened, that the Bundys were just lying about that.
So the key thing I want to say is they lied. They actually said, well, two things. They said it never happened, but they also withheld the evidence that proved it was a true statement.
Yeah, and the prosecutors, the U.S. attorneys, assisted them, the FBI, in that. They scrubbed all the evidence, all the files and everything from anything that had the FBI in it. They literally scrubbed it. And when we finally uncovered it, they had to disclose to us 3,800 files, not just documents, files, 3,800 files of exculpatory evidence that was hidden by the FBI. And it showed that basically the things that happened at the Bundy Ranch were instigated by the government, and that the people had every right to stand up against them and say, no, and that's why the judge finally said, look, this is just too bad. I have to dismiss this case. Like, you guys have violated, it's so. And she wasn't willing to go down with the ship. She was like, wait a minute. She started blaming it on the FBI, started blaming it on the U.S. prosecutors, because she wasn't going to go down with the ship. Didn't want to go down with the FBI. Didn't want to go down with the prosecutors. So she was like, hey, this is your baby, and I'm going to dismiss this case. And it was very painful. We were in prison for 2 years. Much of that was solitary confinement, all during this process of going through trial. Never once were able to have any contact with our families. But it just took a lot of grit, going through that situation for our family, my father, my brothers, to just not give up, because it was terrible. Even going back and forth to the courthouse they were putting a ton of pressure on us. I won't even go into the detail abuse that we received, because they knew that the case was falling apart and they needed us to plea or give up, and we didn't. And that's basically how we won the case in Nevada. And so we walked out of that federal prison after going through 2 major trials, both in Oregon and Nevada, being acquitted on all charges. We walked out without even a misdemeanor.
So that's almost like a Cinderella story, right? I mean, we talked about the two-tier judicial system, different class of people. That needs to that's kind of becoming of a communist nation, not the United States of America, by the people, for the people, of the people.
Yeah, it's exactly what we see in other nations, where their law is just political. Where whoever gets in power, the force of law, then they could use it politically against the other people. And that's exactly what was happening. That's what's happening in January 6th, situation. We've seen that happen many, many times. And the FBI, unfortunately, is the one who instigates a lot of that, does the groundwork, and becomes basically that standing army for whatever political power is in office. And that's not the United States of America. That's not what Idaho is. And that very same thing is what we're seeing in the Republican Party right now, going on right now here in Idaho.
All right. So you made a video that's gotten a lot of views and a lot of chatter about. But boil it down. Give us the details. What does this mean for the people of Idaho?
So we just found out, it was just a few days ago, from some inside information, and that basically that the Idaho GOP, Idaho Republican leaders are proposing a rule change, and they want to change the rules so that anybody who runs on the Republican ticket has to get the leader's endorsement. So, for example, I'm running as governor. If they pass this rule change in the Republican Party, I will have to then submit or send a letter or somehow go through a process of asking for their endorsement for me to run on the Republican ticket. And basically it comes down to 4 people. 4 people, the leaders of the Republican Party, can say, no, we're not going to endorse Ammon Bundy, which we already know they don't like me. Tom Luna, who's one of the 4, has already written a letter and sent it out to everybody that the Republican Party is not going to support Ammon Bundy. So they can easily say no, and then I can't run on in the Republican primary.
Right.
That I will not be put on the ballot. And it's a really interesting thing. Let me just read you here. So it's Article 12. They're trying to propose Section 5. Any candidate seeking the Republican nomination for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, state treasurer shall first obtain an endorsement for such office from the state central committee of the Idaho Republican Party. So that's the 4 people. The chairman of the Idaho Republican Party shall provide a certified letter to the Idaho Secretary of State no later than the filing deadline. The Idaho Secretary of State shall only publish names of candidates on the Idaho Republican primary ballot that are contained on the certified letter from the chairman of the Idaho Republican Party. So basically, the 4 Republican Party bosses will say, look, we're going to endorse this person or not. And so they decide and they tell the Secretary of State who can be on the ballot and who can't be on the ballot. And the Secretary of State basically can only put those names on. And if they don't like me or anybody else, then they just say, you can't put his name on the ballot. And that's where we're at. And so that's kind of the gist of it.
This is, we grow up in this nation and, you often hear, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be president. And they're like, you can be president if you want. It's just kind of a known. If you want to run for office in this nation, you get to put your name in the hat. And if the people elect you, you fill that office for that time. But that's not, if this passes, that's not the case, at least in the Republican Party of Idaho. This is exclusive to the Republican Party. This is not Democrat Party or any other party. This is the Republican Party.
The Republican Party has dominated Idaho elections for at least 5 decades. Whoever is the Republican nominee wins the governor, wins the lieutenant governor, and so on and so forth. So they are controlling the seats of the government of Idaho. That's what's happening.
Well, what's interesting about that, right? Because there's a primary which you're in the contender for, and you have to win that. But when that's over, then you'll go to the state and you'll be running against the Democratic candidate. In your meetings you've been hosting, you've had many people with a D in front of their name saying they like what you're saying. They're supporting what you're doing. And if this goes the way it does, those people with a D in front of their name, they don't even get a chance to vote for you.
Well, there are a lot of conservatives that are Republican, and there are a few conservatives that are Democrat, and there are a few conservatives that are independent and constitutional, right? Or most of them are actually conservative. And so, basically I won't be the Republican nominee, so I wouldn't be on the ticket as a Republican. I think, what needs to be pointed out is that what the GOP is doing, the Idaho GOP is doing, is very similar to what the Chinese Communist Party does, what Russia has done, where basically the party decides who's going to run, and then it makes it look like it's a democratic process, right? But it's really not, because they decide who's going to be on the ballot. They decide who's going to be, and then the people come and they make a choice, and they think, oh, look, we chose this person. And that's the reality of what's happening. That's what, the party leaders are doing. That's what, Governor Little is pushing, Speaker Bedke is pushing, and it's basically a communist tactic to make sure they don't have competition. Oh, and here we go.
Yeah.
Comrade Brad, right? And Bedke. Yeah, Comrade Bedke. So, anyway, that is, it's not an attack on really anybody, one person. It is what has been done in the past in communist countries, and that's what is happening right here in Idaho.
So let's say, this vote for the committees, if it is today, if it passes, it goes to another level.
Yeah, the precinct leaders,
and they vote it.
Yeah.
So let's, hypothetically, it passes both. What happens to Ammon Bundy for governor campaign?
Well, first of all, let me just say, because it hasn't passed yet.
Okay.
And so right now, if the people watching this will go to the website, votebuddy.com, if they'll go to news and they'll go to the press release about the Idaho Republican leaders, they scroll down. There's a link there where they can find their county leaders of the Republican Party and call them and say, look, you have to vote against this, right? Tomorrow, Saturday, they vote.
Okay.
So anyway, you can still do something about it. You can still go and express your distaste for this and actually, try to get those leaders to not vote for it.
So that's votebundy.com. Go to news. Go to news, and this is the top.
Just scroll.
This is the top one.
It's like the third one now because there's some. But scroll down to press release, and then go into that and click where it says find your county party contacts.
Got it.
And
Perfect.
then call them and say we don't want this. This is bad for Idaho. So, but let's say your question, like, what if it passes? Is that was your question?
Yeah. So they made no secret that you're not going to get any Republican support. So this seems like it's premeditated. Let's say it goes through.
Well, I don't know if it'll go through or not. It might not. There might be enough, of the leaders that understand this and stand against it, and so it may not go through. But if it does, then we will challenge it in the courts. We will challenge it in the courts, saying that it is, it's not, legal. There's some statutes that, kind of are gray in this area. We will definitely challenge it in the courts. We will fight against it and try to make it so that this doesn't become the normal in Idaho.
Wow.
I mean, imagine this. Imagine if the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Independent Party, and the Constitutional Party all follow this, right? So basically, if you want to run in Idaho, you have to get in the graces of the party bosses.
You have to be, yeah.
And that basically, it doesn't matter what party it is. That's what it becomes. And that's an oligarchy where you can't run for office. You can't be in office without the graces of a small group of people controlling who's on the ballot. And that's what we're facing. So it's not just about Republicans. It's about everybody in Idaho, making sure that we don't fall under this type of rule, which is a communist rule.
Right. And there's rules like you have to be a certain age. You had to actually file with the Secretary of State.
Yeah, those are in the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not like you didn't do any. You've already met the mark to be on the ballot. So, wow. All right. Well, that is something I'm sure you're not looking forward to, is another challenge in the courts, just so that you can do what it's our right to be able to pick our leaders. But I guess we hope that it doesn't go that way. But if it does, we wish you well in that fight.
Right.
Does that mean that your campaign goes away? Or what
let's
happens?
say I lose, it passes, and then I lose in the courts, and so that ends up being the way it is. I do not believe in any stretch of the imagination that the Republican bosses are going to endorse me. I don't think that's going to be the case, even though my platform is much closer to the Republican platform than they have been acting. But it's just the way it is. So I'm not going to think that I can't win, because we're going to continue to fight if we have to. Again, it may be ended today. It may not pass through the committees. Right. It may not pass tomorrow, and it's done. No big deal. But if it doesn't and we lose through the courts, I also will still feel very strongly about giving the people of Idaho a choice between, basically your establishment Republican rhino, Brad Little, and someone who is really going to defend and fight for liberty and put the state on a correct path. I'm going to give the people that choice, and I don't know exactly how I'll do it, but I feel very important. It is very important. I feel very motivated to give the people of Idaho a choice of how they're going to go. And the Republican Party choosing who's going to be on the ballot, and then giving all their, support and everything to basically one candidate, which will be the governor, and then him end up being on the general ticket against the Democrat it basically is saying that Brad Little will be our governor. And I think it is very, very important that the people of Idaho have a choice.
Well, for the record, Brad still has not announced that he's running for governor. We're just assuming that.
Well, he has a campaign, though, that he's been collecting campaign funds for this race. So, yeah, even though he hasn't, verbally said, he's making all the moves, and he's collected almost $1 million, the last report we had, for this campaign. And he will ultimately spend about $5 million to probably $5 to $8 million if I was to, guesstimate what's going to happen. And it will be attacking the other candidate on the ticket, and or in the generals attacking those candidates. So yeah, it's something that we have to be aware of. But he's going to run.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that should wrap up our podcast for the day. Thank you for joining us for Ammon Answers. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and send them to us. But definitely go to the website, get engaged. If this bothers you, call the people on the link there. Let them know how you're feeling, and maybe we can stop this ahead of time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Oh, that's a great picture of that kid.